Halloween from 1978. Happy Halloween, everybody. I know it's a little weird that I haven't done a video for this movie yet because one of my earliest videos was a review for Halloween Kills. And it was really more of a rant than a review. It got a fair amount of traction, for me anyway. And you'd think that a guy who ranted about a Halloween movie would have shared his thoughts on the original Halloween at some point. Well, now it's happening. John Carpenter's original Halloween. It's one of my favorite horror movies. It's a movie that I tend to watch every year around Halloween. I just think it's great. It sets an incredibly creepy tone and creates a brilliant fall atmosphere, which is somewhat surprising because despite taking place in the suburbs of Illinois on Halloween, it was actually filmed in Southern California in the spring. And if you look closely, you can even see some palm trees in the background. But for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like that. The leaves on the ground, the way it's filmed, the town itself, it all just feels very Midwestern. And some of it even reminds me of some areas of Long Island in the fall. It just has that every town USA feel. I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say about it at the end, but for now I think we should just get started. Halloween from 1978, directed by John Carpenter, starring Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance, and Nick Castle. The movie's opening credits show a pumpkin with the iconic Halloween John Carpenter theme playing. Yeah, that's right. John Carpenter not only directed this movie and co-wrote it with his partner, Deborah Hill, he also composed the music for it. This dude is no joke. And the jack-o'-lantern itself has always been fascinating to me because it has that weird cut leading from the nose to the mouth. I don't know why. I don't think it means anything particularly deep. I just think it's something that happens if you get a little lazy when you're carving it. But moving on, finally. It opens up on Halloween night in 1963, Haddonfield, Illinois. We see a point of view of Michael Myers as he enters his home. And the point of view killer thing was well established in the movie Black Christmas, which came out 4 years prior to this. So I think maybe John Carpenter is taking some inspiration from that. And the young Michael, he's a kid at this point, spies on his older sister Judith and her boyfriend. She invites the dude upstairs, and Michael goes into the house, and he grabs a knife and puts on a clown mask. And it's not long before Judith's boyfriend says he has to go. He puts on his shirt and leaves. That is the fastest sex I've ever seen. I timed it. From the time they make it upstairs to the time the boyfriend comes back down, it is 1 minute, 7 seconds. Tragic. I get that he's a teenager. A 25-year-old teenager, but come on. I mean, a good portion of that had to be just taking their clothes off. So we're probably talking about 30 seconds here. And then he just leaves. I mean, what a weak move. You got to stick around to redeem yourself, dude. What are you doing? Anyway, he's gone, and Michael heads upstairs slowly. Judith is sitting in front of her mirror, combing her hair, topless, as you do, I guess. And he stabs his sister to death. Double tragic. He then goes outside, and his parents have just arrived. They don't know what the fuck's going on. They take his clown mask off, and we see that Michael is just a little boy. It's one of the few times in the franchise we actually see his face. And he's obviously just a kid here. It's a pretty shocking way to open a movie, a kid killing his sister for absolutely no reason. And if only that dude could have held on to his load, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And then it jumps over to Smiths Grove, Illinois, on the night of October 30th, 1978. Dr. Loomis is introduced. Michael has been his patient for the last 15 years, and in all that time, he hasn't spoken a single word. He's with a nurse, and they are picking up Michael to go to a court hearing. Why they're doing this at night, I'll never know, but they are. They pull up to the sanitarium and see that a bunch of the patients are outside wandering around. Turns out that Michael has escaped. And while Loomis is out of the car unlocking the gate, Michael comes out of nowhere and throws the nurse from the car, steals it, and drives away. How he learned how to drive who knows? And Loomis freaks out. He says the evil is gone. Despite being a psychiatrist, he has long given up on helping Michael. He just wants to keep him locked up forever because he's evil. And the next day we get introduced to Laurie Strode, played by a 19-year-old Jamie Lee Curtis in her first movie. She's on her way to school. She drops off a key at the old Myers house. Apparently her dad owns the property and is looking to sell it. And Laurie keeps seeing Michael throughout the day. He appears as a masked figure, but often disappears, and no one else seems to notice him. On her way home from school, she meets up with her friends, Annie and Linda. And Linda is kind of ditzy, and Annie is kind of a bitch. There's really no other way to put it. And they both dismiss Laurie's claims about seeing a strange guy in a mask. Of course, it is Halloween. Even though it's early, it's probably not that weird to see someone in a mask. And it turns out that Annie and Laurie are babysitting tonight. They part ways for now. Laurie heads home, and she sees the same guy standing in the yard. It's a great scene because he seems to disappear right before her eyes. That's weird, right? She never looks away, and yet he disappears while she's still looking at him. I mean, we don't see him disappear, but it seems like she saw it. It's pretty creepy. It's also creepy that Laurie has a picture of a James Ensor painting on her wall. I mean, what a nerd. She also has like a straw hat mounted on her wall, as you do. I don't know. Laurie's weird. And she's kind of anxious. She seems to think that she's hallucinating this guy, which, wouldn't be my first guess, but okay. And Annie drives her mom's car to pick up Laurie, and she's smoking weed, which is insane. Not that she's smoking weed, but that she's doing it in her mom's car. There is no way that will go unnoticed. She shares the joint with Laurie, and that's kind of surprising because Laurie is one of the original final girls. But typically, smoking weed in a slasher movie is a death sentence. But Laurie does it, and she's fine. Although she did smoke it rather poorly, so maybe that helped her chances. Who knows? And they end up driving by Annie's dad, who is the sheriff of Haddonfield. They talk to him for a minute, and it turns out that a store has been robbed, some masks, some rope, and some knives have been taken. And of course, one of those masks must have been a Captain Kirk Star Trek mask, because that is what Michael Myers famously wears. Although, contrary to popular belief, it didn't actually start out as a Star Trek mask. It was originally a prosthetic that William Shatner wore in a horror movie called The Devil's Reign. And I guess the mold for it was used as a Star Trek mask that was eventually sold in stores. I mean, this mask has a more interesting origin story than Michael Myers himself. And as John Carpenter has jokingly said in the past, he owes his career to William Shatner. Anyway, the sheriff says it was probably just a bunch of kids who robbed the store, and Laurie and Annie drive off. Laurie is very worried that the sheriff could smell the weed, and I can almost guarantee that she's right. But Annie says no way, so whatever. And Annie wants Laurie to ask someone to the upcoming dance. Annie and Linda are boy obsessed. Laurie isn't, though. She's kind of shy. She isn't really comfortable asking someone out. But she does mention that she wishes Ben Tramer would ask her out. And who the hell is Ben Tramer? In this movie, he's nobody. But in Halloween 2, he gets run over by a cop car and explodes. Tragic. Pre-tragic. So it's probably best if Laurie doesn't get too attached. And Annie pulls up to the houses that they're going to be babysitting at. Annie is looking after a girl named Lindsay, and Laurie is babysitting a boy named Tommy Doyle. And they're right across the street from each other, so that's convenient. And in the meantime, Loomis informs the sheriff that Michael is loose in town. So they decide to go to the old Myers house to see if he's been there. Turns out he has. They find a dead, half-eaten dog, which is more than a little nuts. And Loomis explains his history with Michael.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
He almost sounds like Quint from Jaws, talking about sharks.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
There are some similarities there, and it's pretty spooky dialogue. It paints a picture without actually having to show anything from Michael's past. And it's even scarier because a professional psychiatrist is the one saying it. Even he can't explain Michael Myers. He's just like, well, he's evil. And I love Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis. He's so great. There are times when he seems just as crazy as Michael. In any case, Michael isn't here now, so they have to keep searching. And why they can't just put out an APB or some shit for this guy, I will never know. I mean, Michael is driving around in a station wagon with a mental hospital's logo stamped on the side of it. It seems like they're making this search harder than it needs to be. And Annie is babysitting Lindsay. She spills something on herself and immediately gets naked, right there in the kitchen. Now, how often do you do that? In someone else's house, no less. I get that she made a mess, but I think it's a little nuts to just completely disrobe in your employer's home. And Michael is outside watching her this entire time like a real prevert. And across the street, Laurie and Tommy are watching The Thing from Another World, which is interesting because John Carpenter would remake that movie a few years after this. And it turned out to be one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies of all time, in my opinion. I should talk about that movie at some point. But for now, take a drink every time Annie yells Lindsay's name. It's absurd. Annie's boyfriend Paul calls, and Annie can't answer because she's stuck in a window. So first she gets naked in someone else's house, and now she's hanging out of a window. What the fuck is going on here? Eventually, she does talk to Paul, and he invites Annie over to his place. So Annie just decides to dump Lindsay off with Laurie across the street. So she's a shitty friend and a shitty babysitter. And yeah, go ahead and fix your hair. Never mind the fact that you don't have any pants on. She is preparing to drive to her boyfriend's house in her underwear. I guarantee that is going to be something they talk about at school tomorrow. But thankfully, Michael kills her when she gets in her car, sparing her the embarrassment. And it's a pretty great scene because she gets in the car and she sees that the window is fogged up. And she has a moment where she thinks that's weird. And then Michael jumps out from the back seat and strangles her. It's pretty well done. And R.I.P. Annie. Tragic. And Laurie, Tommy, and Lindsay are now watching Forbidden Planet. It's not a bad double feature. And Tommy looks out a window and sees Michael carrying Annie's body inside the house. He freaks out and says it's the boogeyman. But Laurie doesn't believe him. And then Linda shows up with her boyfriend Bob at Lindsay's, which is bizarre. These two people were not hired to babysit, but they just walk into this house. Lindsay is not even here, yet they just walk in and start making out on the couch. That's kind of weird. And they don't even really question it. They don't seem to care that no one's around. They're happy that they're gone. I think they should probably be questioning this more, but all they do is take the opportunity to go upstairs and have sex. And this is another situation where the sex does not last very long. Literally seconds, and Bob is done. And yet, Linda seems very satisfied, and Bob seems to be the one who is disappointed. I don't get it. In any case, Bob gets up to go get a beer from the fridge, and Michael shows up and stabs him. And he doesn't just stab him, he pins him to the wall, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't even look like the knife has gone completely through him, and yet it is holding his weight, much like Laurie's wall-mounted hat. And Michael just stares at his handiwork, almost admiring his own artistry. And then he puts on a bedsheet and Bob's glasses and heads upstairs, and Linda thinks it's Bob just playing a little bit of a Halloween trick on her. She ignores him and decides to call Laurie. She apparently has memorized the Doyle's house number. But before she can say anything, Michael grabs her and strangles her with the phone wire. Yeah, phones used to have wires. And Laurie hears this struggle and doesn't really know what to make of it. She gets concerned when Michael picks up the phone and just breathes into it, so that's nice. And while all this is happening, Loomis is still hanging out at Michael's old house, and some kids show up, and one of them tries to go inside on a dare. And then Loomis does this.
Chicken! Go ahead, Lonnie. Go in!
Hey! Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
I don't know why he's scaring away children by hiding in bushes and doing a weird accent. I mean, if he wanted to get rid of them, just the presence of an adult probably would have done that. He could have just been himself, but I guess he enjoyed the idea of being a weirdo in the bushes. And with the kids now asleep, Laurie decides to go over to Lindsay's house to see if Annie and Linda are okay. And the house is quiet. Seems like nobody's home. The back door is open, which should be a red flag for Laurie, but it's not. She thinks they're just trying to scare her. She goes in and finds Annie's dead body in one of the bedrooms and Judith Myers' headstone resting above her. I mean, Jesus, he went through a lot of effort. Was he lugging around a headstone all fucking day? Loomis found out that the headstone was missing from the cemetery when it was still light out. So, what's he been doing with it? He's not exactly traveling light. In any case, she also finds dead Linda in a cupboard, and Bob's dead body comes swinging in upside down. It's a very elaborate setup, and Laurie just starts crying. And Michael creeps out from the dark and stabs her in the arm. This guy has been so precise so far. I don't know how he only manages to get her in the arm, but regardless, Laurie falls down the stairs and runs outside screaming for help. The whole neighborhood ignores her, which seems to be somewhat reflective of the Kitty Genovese situation, which only occurred about 14 years prior to this movie. And she heads back to Tommy Doyle's house and bangs on the door. Apparently, she locked herself out, and she can't find her keys. I don't know why. She definitely put them in her pocket, but thankfully Tommy finally gets out of bed and lets her in. And the only reason she survives is because Michael Myers doesn't run. If he ran, this franchise would be a lot more tragic than it is. She sends Tommy upstairs while she tries to call the police, but the phone is dead, of course. And then Michael just appears from behind the couch. Do not understand how he got in. He really is just an apparition at times, and Laurie stabs him in the neck with kind of a gigantic yarn sewing needle. She picks up his knife, only to drop it seconds later because she assumes he's dead. She goes upstairs to Tommy and Lindsay. Tommy thinks, once again, that it was the boogeyman, but Laurie assures him that she killed him. And of course, he's standing right behind them. And she tells them to lock themselves in their room. Why she doesn't stay with them, I'll never know. I mean, if you're protecting kids, you should probably stay with them, right? But thankfully, Michael has no interest in them and continues to pursue Laurie. She ends up hiding in the closet, and Michael breaks in, and Laurie stabs him in the eye with a hanger. She then picks up the knife and stabs him. And then what does she do? Well, she drops the fucking knife again. She sends the kids outside to the neighbors to call the police. Again, why she doesn't go with them, I'll never know. Loomis is outside and sees the kids running out, so he goes into the house. And of course, Michael ends up sitting up like he's the fucking Undertaker. He sneaks up behind Laurie and tries to choke her. She pulls his mask off briefly, and Loomis shows up just in time to shoot him. He falls off the balcony and appears dead. Laurie says it was the boogeyman, and Loomis agrees. But when he looks back, Michael is gone. And the movie ends with the sound of Michael's breathing as it shows several places around Haddonfield, implying that he could be anywhere. It's pretty creepy stuff. And we'll see in the sequel, Loomis goes even crazier because he shot him 6 times.
I shot him 6 times. I shot him in the heart. This guy, this man, he's not human.
And that's the movie. Overall, I think it's great. I like most John Carpenter movies, and I think this is one of his best. It feels unsettling and builds tension really well. It doesn't hurt that the music is outstanding as well. We don't ever know why Michael kills people and why he likes to do it on Halloween. And I think that's a question that shouldn't be answered. I mean, whenever we hear about a real-life serial killer in the news, we always wonder what could make someone do such horrible things. But sometimes there isn't a good reason. Some people are just bad. And I think Michael Myers is representative of that. And this is obviously a slasher movie, the best in my opinion. It didn't invent the slasher genre, but it definitely popularized it. And I was wondering if this movie is like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the sense that a lot of the events depend on the characters being stupid. A lot of people think that in order for a horror movie to happen, all the characters have to be stupid. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I can think of a lot of horror movies that don't have stupid characters. But unfortunately, Halloween isn't one of them. It does have stupid characters, but I don't think the plot happens because they're stupid. I think it would happen anyway. And I don't think it's really a flaw in the movie, in my opinion. And we're dealing with teenagers in the suburbs. They shouldn't know how to deal with this situation. And when you think about it, maybe this is a bit of a hot take, I think Laurie is probably the character that makes the dumbest decisions. Because Annie and Linda are dead before they know anything. They never had a chance to begin with. But Laurie is the one that kind of makes all the mistakes. And in the end, she's kind of just lucky that Loomis shows up in time. I also think that the sheriff is a dumb character. I mean, is he the only cop on duty? Why does he seem so unbothered by the fact that there's a psychotic killer loose in his town? It's just really weird. And he also never finds out that his daughter was killed, at least not in this movie. And that brings me to the sequels and the remakes and the remade sequels. This franchise has the most convoluted and ridiculous timeline ever. I mean, how many franchises have had 6 direct sequels, a sequel that has nothing to do with anything, a remake, a sequel to the remake, and then 3 movies that take place after the original movie but ignore all the original sequels? I mean, that is insane any way you slice it. I can't think of any independent property that has done this. And what makes it even worse, at least in my opinion, is that most of them are bad. I think the original Halloween 2 is okay. I like it fine. But after that, I really lose interest. And the reboot sequels from 2018, I think, are terrible. And I really wish Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, had been more successful. Because although that movie is kind of insane, I still love it. And I think it's a lot of fun. I love that it has absolutely nothing to do with Michael Myers. And I think that if Halloween had to become a franchise, that's what it should have been. Just a different movie with a totally different horror story every Halloween season. I mean, that would be great. But when Halloween 3 came out, everyone said, fuck this, how could you make a Halloween movie without Michael Myers? And as a result, that's all we've gotten from this franchise ever since. Tragic. But those are my thoughts on the original Halloween. Let me know what you think of it. And for those of you who are sick of hearing me talk about horror movies and just want me to get back to Star Trek, don't worry, that's coming. this is really all I've got in terms of horror movies for this Halloween season. So hopefully I'll be back in November with some Star Trek stuff. But for now, I hope everyone has a happy and safe Halloween, and until next time, take it easy.
Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.